So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging, there's Sam, sorry, we'll just let Sam in. I'm not sure for some reason my slides are not moving through. Yeah, so I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would like also to pay my respects, and I'm sure you would too, to elders past, present and emerging. Yeah, so welcome everyone very much to this webinar series, the AgTech Seeds webinar series. I'd just like to start by telling you a little bit about the AgTech Seeds program, just for those that aren't aware. So LaunchVic and Agriculture Victoria have funded Rocket Seeder to deliver what we call a pre-accelerator program for Victorian AgTech startups over 2 years, starting July last year and concluding in June next year. So we're currently in the middle of our second cohort, and we have lots of people here today from that, which is fantastic. We also have some people from the first cohort. So we still have 2 cohorts to run. So if you're interested, you have an idea or you have something you're looking into, some tech or some R&D you're looking to commercialise, please take a screenshot of the QR code, and that'll take you straight to the AgTech Seeds program page. And we'd love you to put an application in. The next program will start in July. But the current program we're halfway through, which is very exciting. So we're very thrilled to have Ruth Nettle here with us today from the University of Melbourne. If we can get my slide on to the next slide. I just got a little bit of a bio about Ruth. So Ruth started out as an agricultural scientist. Her career has spanned work as a dairy extension officer, a private agronomist, a rural financial counsellor, and following the completion of her PhD, she's now with the University of Melbourne in the Education and Social Science area. So Ruth leads the Rural Innovation Research Group at the University of Melbourne, with a focus on agricultural innovation, the social organisation of farming, farm workplace relations, the resilience of farming systems and rural communities, and agricultural extension and policy and design. And Ruth is going to lead our discussion today around farmer segmentation. And thank you all for joining. I think it will be an excellent session. Over to you, Ruth. I'll just stop sharing my slides for you. Let me just move.
Great. Thanks so much, Nikki. And it's wonderful to see half of you, but see you here today, and hopefully we can have some interaction today as well. We've only got a short period of time, but it's really good to meet you, and Nikki and Emma had been telling me a bit about you and your interests as you complete the program or interested in the program of Ag Seeds. So I'll just share my screen, but hopefully I'll get a chance to interact with you, and because we have a few sort of chat sessions and open mic, as well as hopefully some time for a couple of breakout rooms just towards the end, where I get to hear a bit about what you're thinking in terms of your what you're interested in and how you might apply the ideas or thinking around segmentation. So Taylor, can I just check whether everyone can see the full screen, or is it my presenter view again?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. So the overview of our session today is bringing into focus for us, I suppose, the importance of recognising and working with diversity in farming. I know that some of you, your main interest isn't necessarily at the farm level. So today, I'm sure you'll get the opportunity to think about how this might apply to whatever client group or others you might be working with as you progress in the program. So we'll be introducing you to some ways of thinking about diversity of customers and clients, and that's through the ideas of segmentation. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with it, but hopefully to give you a different angle today. So the hope is that we'll be able to apply the insights from today for having you think more about the reach to more farmers in what you're doing, or targeting or aligning what you're doing with different needs or motivations of people that you're working with. So overall, hopefully, depending on where you're at in the program, it's going to assist you in your marketing or your service strategies, and to engage with farmers where they're at. So the big focus for the session is about working with diversity in agriculture and amongst farmers. And I just thought I'd kick off with some anecdotes to, bring us to start thinking about the topic. And I've worked with farmers for over 30 years and rural communities as well. And I know that some of you are farmers and have been working with farmers as well. And I think, like you, I never stopped learning about farmers and farming. So I've got sort of three stories about some of the experiences that I've had in working with farmers and the diversity of farmers. And the first one is my 2 farm driveways example. And that is where on any day you might be driving up 2 farm driveways, and they might be next to each other, they might be neighbouring farms, and you're visiting to talk about whether it's a new program or some products or services. And you've got these 2 farms next to each other. They're the same size, they're both family farms, they seem to largely operate similarly, but you find that your discussion resonates with the first farm you drive, the driveway that you go up, but not necessarily the second. And I suppose today what we're going to do is consider some of the reasons for that and what it means for you. The second anecdote is the middle one here about who has to change. And I worked for many years with industry bodies, with government, with farming bodies, and everyone wants someone to adopt something or to change something. Now, yes, that's always with good intentions in mind and with benefit in mind. But I often see that this desire for change often brings with it some frustration. So some people, talk about the lack of adoption or that farmers are very hard to reach. And although it's changing a little, I still think that it's rare to hear people talk about what's enabling change or what's supporting change, or what can I do to make things easier for people to change. And what maybe as service providers or people providing products and services and technologies, what do we need to do differently to better engage? So hopefully today we're going to have a way to shift that mindset and really think about what we perhaps can do to change rather than expecting others to change. And the final anecdote is my experience, I suppose, working with people like yourselves and the drive to minimum viable products and use cases in testing different technology services or products. And I suppose for many innovators and product developers like yourselves, I see that the focus is often about the minimum number of use cases and a real focus on some of the technical aspects, things like, does it work at a farm level, which is really, really important. I suppose what I'd like to see is some opening up of the selection of use cases to consider the diversity of people around the human and economic aspects of why they might be interested in your products and services, how they might use it, how they learn, what are the effects on skills and jobs, and what after-sales service might be needed, or what's the ongoing learning and adaptation that might be needed. So could perhaps the use cases be considered differently. So it's something we might touch on today as well. So these stories that I've just provided from my experience really relate to this diversity in farming and in agriculture. And so we're going to tackle that a bit today by thinking about segmentation and clustering or grouping people based on certain characteristics and how we might that help us change how we target or align what we do or what we have. Now, a bit of a disclaimer before we launch in. I'm not a marketer and I'm not an expert in commercialisation. I am a rural sociologist and I specialise in the change management area, and particularly related to the farm scale and the design of change programs. But I think Nikki and Emma thought that this might be of interest to you as something a bit out of the particular field or out of the areas of expertise that you've been hearing from and learning from. So I hope that's the case today. Okay, so just coming to our topic today about segmentation and accounting for diversity. It made me think about, well, what happens if we don't account for diversity? Or think that one size in our products or services or technologies need to fit all. And I suppose what we found in our experience is that even in designing extension programs, which is often what I'm called on to help with, that if we go with one model or one idea, then people will self-select. So they'll either accept what we have to offer or they'll reject it. And so it might mean that the rejection causes a result in a lack of reach or market size. It might actually alienate or exclude people that decide something then isn't for them. And overall, it means we have less use or less impact in what we're trying to achieve. And so the role of segmentation that we're going to cover today is to reveal meaningful diversity in a population that can support some targeting and achieve some greater reach or use in what we're doing. So I thought this is a good place to pause to get your insights and your experience about diversity in the farming population. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the chat, or feel free to come off your mute. We might need some moderation here, but come off your mute to just brainstorm or reveal some of your experience about how farmers are diverse. So from your knowledge and experience, what are some of the ways you've noticed that farmers or clients that you're working with differ?
I find that all the farmers that are really interested are the sort of city-based ones that actually earn their money not on farm. So they're 30 to 100 hectares. They're right into everything you want to do, but they're not our clients. Our clients are more around the 1,000 hectare mark, and they're very closed because any change is incredibly expensive for them. So it's a really different market, and it's very difficult because all the little ones want to talk to you, and it's as much work to talk a small guy into something as it is 1,000 hectares. So it's a very different, protocol. Yeah,
and that's a really good point that we talk a fair bit about today. You have underneath those two examples a different motivation for why they're interested, and also with the financial aspects that you've just described, a different base that they're coming from in being able to engage around their economic sort of situation. So there are a couple of things that we'll pick up as we go. Thanks, Samantha. Anyone else? Now, I can't see the chat at the moment, so perhaps Nikki and Taylor might just, if there's things coming through the chat, but would anyone else like to come off mic and say something?
Yeah, I find that there's a really wide level of sophistication between farmers, even independent of their land size. Some are intergenerational, they're very welded on to what they've always done. They're not very innovative, and they don't really understand a business case. So they just farm for the sake of farming. All the way through to people who will look at a new idea immediately be able to apply it to their situation and be able to, in their head, calculate the business case and talk to you straight away about whether they will or won't.
Yeah, good points, Andrew. And you raised there quickly, independent of their farm size. And that's exactly what we're talking about today, that I'll go through a segmentation analysis that we've done. And it really shows that even within the same, demographic characteristics like farm size or farm type, there is still this variation. And so that's what we're trying to tap into in today. And we also think about the business orientation and tradition of farming. Yeah.
Can I just add to that point that Andrew just made, that it does seem to be that those ones that are more closed also won't even look at the fact that it'll save them money. Like they don't have any attitude to that at all. They're only looking at not wanting to change the way or paradigm they think in. So changing the paradigm is really hard, even if you're going to save them a lot of money from input levels or whatever it is that you're selling or marketing. They just won't look at it. Yeah.
So today, what I'm hoping what we'll just touch on very briefly is without having them change, so not changing their paradigm, what might be the way that you can align or speak to their paradigm. So yeah, it's a really good point to bring out. Yeah.
Get them to change without having the fear of changing.
Something like that, yes. Was there anything in the chat, Nikki or Taylor, I should make note of, because we might move on?
No, not that I can see.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah,
Sorry,
sure.
I can't resist. I shouldn't, but I will. Just that I having spent my career in agriculture, I find that we talk about I find I'm in conversations where we talk about farmers as if they're homogenous. Like there's one type of farmer, but and I think what you're trying to emphasize is that's actually not the case, because and often in the department, like we would talk about, there'd be like this proxy view about farmers. And I find that if we can keep an open mind about what a farmer is and what they do and how they think and, how they respond to change, they're people, and they run a business. And I think often it's about the business drivers as opposed to the person, or a combination of the two, that we're talking about their needs as a business operation.
So you're saying it's more about us understanding what their business operation is, like, because they're not going to necessarily tell us what the ins and outs are of their particular problem.
Well, I'm just saying that I think we need to, that not all farmers are the same. That's what I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's what, we're going to be, drilling down a little bit about on this and thinking about how farmers might be different, that we can tap into it. So, yeah. But Andrew, were you going to jump in there?
No, sorry, that was me, I think.
Oh, sorry, Sam.
Being an old farmer myself, I think there is a broad range of farmers out there, and I think a lot of them are very astute in adaptation of new technology and new farming needs, and a broad cross-section right to people that don't want to change. But there are an awful lot of farmers that will grab onto something very quickly if they see a need for it.
Yeah, so we'll talk a bit about that today in terms of the need and what might that need be and how even needs differ and how we can align there. Yeah, so really good points, and we'll definitely have a chance to discuss more about it. So I was just going to now sort of focus in on some ways that we could perhaps understand this diversity in a meaningful way. There is a lot of diversity that you've just described, but how could we perhaps, codify or bring it to a sense that helps us think about how we might target or market our products and services. So just as a very brief background around segmentation as a method or an approach. And just to note that it's not the expectation today that we're encouraging you all to do segmentation. It's just giving the background to these approaches, and then we're going to actually try and use and apply it in our thinking. So what segmentation does is try to identify actionable subsets of a population so that we can actually do something different that better meets the needs or reach to different subsets of a population. And that can be people's needs or their expectations or demands or of their values, which is what we're going to focus on today. So it acknowledges the varied characteristics and motivations of people. And so it's really about helping to think about, well, how might people differ in their interest in what you have to offer, how or why they might use a particular product or service or innovation that you're working on. In particular, I hope to emphasise the importance of the people they talk to, not necessarily you, but the importance of networks and who they actually trust in information and advice, and also the way they differ in the value or benefit that they're seeking. So they're the sort of, I suppose, applications of segmentation, or why we might think about segmentation. Now, at the university, I run a micro-credential, which is a short training on segmentation that is the equivalent of about a quarter of a subject at uni. And so I'm not going to go through the different methods. That's something that we do in our micro-credential. But just to acknowledge that you're probably very familiar with different segmentation approaches, and you're probably largely familiar with the psychological segmentations, so people's personalities and very individual focus on how people might differ. You're probably very familiar with the way agriculture segments a population on farm size or age or demographics or location. And you've all probably either been rung up or conduct consumer behaviour studies for market research. So thinking about purchasing behaviours and things like the effect of social norms or social marketing. So all these very valid methods of segmentation. What I was going to talk to you today about, and we're going to use and apply, is one that I've been involved with that's specific for agriculture, called the derived attitudinal farmer segmentation, that really is about how do farmers differ in terms of their motivation to farm and why they're farming. So their values and attitudes towards farming in general. So there's strengths and weaknesses of all these methods. I'm not promoting one or the other, just highlighting that we're going to use this fourth one today to get the creative juices flowing, so to speak. So in terms of how you might use a segmentation approach, yes, it might be about tailoring messages. It could be using different channels to promote your products and services. It could be doing strategic collaborations with those that are trusted sources for farmers. It could be a way you profile your product and service in terms of what it does or what it offers or what it solves. Or it could overall help you think about how to better provide a service to farmer groups. So I just want to give you like a couple of quick examples from the segmentation that we're going to be using today to think about this. And it's the idea of having different messages for different segments, which I'm sure you've sort of had a go at already or familiar with it as an approach. So just to get you a bit familiar with the segments we're going to work with today, it's a study that we've done. I'll talk about it shortly, but we had generated 6 different segments across, this is a dairy farming population. And you can see we named the segments to try to reflect the essence of the difference in motivations in farming. So family first, that it's actually the family, not the farm, that's most important. Winding down, the idea that yes, we're farming, but we're exiting, or we're not wanting to continue in farming. The love farming group, which I think some of you were talking about. The established and stable, those that are motivated by keeping things much the same as it is because they've generated their position. People that have a motivation that are open to change and seeking innovation, seeking change. And those that are motivated around growing for intergenerational change or succession. So these are going to be the segments we're going to have work with today. But I just wanted to say that, so some of the ways you can think about diversity is thinking about the way you develop messages and describe and outline what you're working on. So here I've just used an example of trying to talk to farmers about adapting farm systems to climate variability. And you can see a host of different types of messages up here about adapting a farm to climate variability. You could focus on that there's practices that can reduce risk. You could focus on how you can be sustainable under climate variability. You could focus on the new ways that you can farm to be adapting to climate variability. You can talk about making money from it, or you could talk about how you can maintain a lifestyle around still adapting to climate variability. So some examples of sort of different ways of framing an approach to a farm. And then you can see that there's the ticks and crosses here that sort of says, well, in terms of what we found in these different segments, this is the likelihood represented by a tick or a cross of that message resonating with a particular segment. And so in terms of, say, risk, that might be very pertinent to people that are thinking of changing or moving out of farming, or not having too much risk related to their goals and motivations, but not necessarily resonate with those that are happy to take risk. And you can see some other patterns here for the segments. So that's one example of applying segmentation. And another is looking at who people are talking to. So here is our segments and some different sort of information sources and advisory sources that farmers might use. And what we found is that these segments will have different patterns of use or trust in different information sources. So this is really important if you're thinking about who, perhaps as an independent private firm trying to make an entry, who would I need to be working with and talking with and gaining their trust, because they're talking to farmers. So you can see that there'd be some segments that would avoid or not even interact with consultants or farm management advisors, but others that would. So that's just to give a bit of a flavour how thinking about people's motivations and values in farming might influence the different messages and sources of information that could still reach people despite their motivations. So I'll just keep going just to talk a bit more about these segments that I've just outlined to you, those sort of 6 segments and how they were derived, because we're going to just drill down a bit more into a couple of segments and get you to apply this way of thinking to a couple of examples. So the method that generated the segments comes from a way of thinking that says definitely in farming, there are many influences on why people are farming, where they're farming, and what they're trying to achieve. And, this is grouped into some of the physical differences between farms, their systems, their climate, their land and water, some of the social and cultural differences about, for instance, new migrants entering systems versus people that have been here for a long time, or traditional owners. Also historical, my family were soldier settlers, and in Western Victoria, my extended family. And so I can still see the patterns of farming really influenced by that soldier settler history. And there's also the economic and market drivers that are going to influence why farmers are farming and where they're farming. And the derived attitudinal farmer segmentation approach asks different attitudinal type questions around these areas, and then takes responses and statistically groups those that are similar. And they become the segments. And so you could consider it different farming styles or different motivations for farming and reasons for farming that are captured through these different field of forces. In terms of why I suppose we find this quite a useful segmentation is because it's based on attitudes and values of farmers. They're relatively stable over time. So while so people will tend to stay in that same segment unless they move on and a new generation comes in, or there's a big replacement of people in the population, and so there's a segment might get larger or smaller rather than change. So we had used this in the dairy industry, a survey of 450 farms, and have applied and used it with dairy industry people for many years, and the way of thinking to help design products and services. So I thought it was just, because it was a data set that we could use and apply today, I thought it was just a good one to bring out so that we could come up with some ideas and tests for what you're working with.
Can I just ask a question at that point?
Yeah.
The dairy, because the dairy industry is being so impacted by the plant milks, was that the motivation for doing it because of that?
No, it was more about issues of climate change and market restructure. And so it was how to better target services and support to farmers in that context, particularly where there was constraints to growth. Yes, I'll bring some of that out as we go. But in terms of its use even now, it still holds because it can help you think about these ways that farmers are different. So this list that I've got up here, how might they change with the pressures that are coming on, say from market pressures and things like what you've just described.
Can we see the things? Are we allowed access to see the?
Yeah, there's a paper, I can share, and definitely at the end of today I can follow up with anyone who would like more information.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, and we're going to work with two of the segments too as well. So to get us thinking about how farmers are different, how we might think differently about our products and services and how they can meet different needs. We found that for this clustering and segmentation that farmers were differing in these sort of 8 main areas in terms of their farming. So just to put you into the picture about what these indices mean. So in that sample, we found farmers are differing in these 8 indexes, and then we looked at whether they were low or high relative to the average of the population. And that's what creates the different segments. So so these terms mean something to you. So in terms of business orientation, that is that the extent to which the farmers believe that business of farming is central and key to why they're farming. Now, it doesn't mean that if farmers were low on that, business isn't important. It's not as important as what other farmers had found. The second one is about whether risk aversion or risk taking is important in their farming. The next one was about whether continuous improvement in the sustainability of their farming is key or not that important. With knowledge and self-reliance, which is very important, I think, for what you're grappling with, is whether seeking input from outside the farm gate was important to their farming, or if they're more self-reliant, so relying on their own knowledge and experience or that of their family and their peers. Intergenerational orientation is all about whether they're motivated in their farming by bringing a next generation on. In this case, because it was a dairy study, this one about the dairy way of life is about whether this specific way of farming, dairying, is important to them and their identity in farming. Financial pressure isn't what financial pressure they are under, like in what is their debt. It was their perceived financial pressure. So even someone with perhaps quite high equity, they still might feel under financial pressure. And the last one is about generally the farming traditions, so whether traditions are important in their farming or not. So you can see that some of the things that you talked to me about in terms of the diversity that you see is what was coming out strongly in things like business orientation, whether they are or aren't strongly business orientated, or the farming tradition, whether they're very set in how they're doing things or more open. So hopefully you see that some of the things that are coming out of this is quite relevant to how you're thinking about your products and services and where they're heading. I do just want to show why this was meaningful for the dairy industry, in that about the reason why they asked for the work in the first place, so like what Samantha asked. At this time, there was quite interested to know about the growth interests of farmers, whether there was an interest in growing the farm business or whether the industry was in decline overall because of the exits and other pressures. And so what we did was we had the segmentation, but we also looked at overall milk production over the last 5 years from that work that we had done. And what it showed, if we look at the segments here, this is the open to change segment in blue, milk production over 5 years. Orange was growing for the kids and yellow was love farming. The blue dotted line is the average. Then we had 3 segments that were not growing, which were winding down, family first, and established and stable. And then what they're reflected here is total milk production, so lower overall production than higher production up here. So you can say, yeah, there were slightly bigger farms potentially up here. But what it really showed was that, yes, there was this was 60% or 67% of the population here that were growing, but the reasons for them growing were different. And that's what the segmentation brings out. So just to explain that a bit further, so this is just 3 of those indices I talked about: business orientation, risk aversion, and tradition. And what our results showed that these 3 growing segments, 3, 5, and 6, had very different motivations in their farming. So the love farming group weren't really motivated around business orientation in their growth. They were happy to take on a little bit of risk, but the tradition of farming was important to them. And that differed very much from a segment that, and these are large parts of the population, that were very motivated by business orientation, had varying risk motivations or perceptions, and had very different tradition index. So the open to change didn't care about tradition at all, where the growing for the kids cared about tradition a lot. So this is where, and you can see the established and stable here again, with no production growth, also differed in these indices. So this actually helped, I suppose, the industry think about how to talk to farmers about growth, all their future intentions, and what would resonate with them using this segmentation. So I hope you're all up for a little bit of an exercise now about applying this segmentation. You don't need to understand it in full. It's really just using what we call segmentation thinking to consider different approaches to what you're offering. But I thought I'd use an example that we could all relate to, but not necessarily is your own idea that you're working on, but I'm hoping you'll be able to apply the same sort of thinking. So our challenge is to support the use of new drone technology to detect crop, pasture, or animal health issues. And we're going to think about this with 2 segments in mind. I'm going to go through it with you next. And what we're thinking about is, where would the value be perceived for this technology for the segment? Who else other than you could influence the segment? And is there a message that would come out that will resonate with the segment? So are we all up for having a go on this by looking at 2 segments? Yep. Okay, so I'm just going to move on, Nikki. Okay, so here's a segment that you're all familiar with, because I bet these are the ones you're working with day on day. So we're starting with the easy ones. So these are the ones that love farming. They're positive about the future. They're motivated, in this case, by the next generation. They're keen to make changes so the farm's sustainable. They're not feeling under financial pressure. They tend to be larger, and they're established farms, but they're slowly growing. They're not taking big leaps. So when we look at this spider diagram, that's reflective here of those indices. No, so if you just look, sorry that it's quite small, but if you see the 0 here, that means that's the average of the population. So when you see the grey area go out, that means they're higher than average in that index. And if they're lower than 0, they're lower in that index. But I've sort of summarised what this segment's all about through the words on the left here. So using the chat or opening your mic, and I know it's very hard to come up with things just on the run, but in your quick appreciation, where would the value of drone technology for monitoring the farm system be for this group?
Well, the main one is people that are advisors that they pay for, vets and agronomists and people that give them data. So they've got actual real data to be giving them that assessment with, I would imagine.
Yeah, so that's a really, really good point, because it's sort of suggesting that rather than necessarily the farmer themselves investing, they would need to be supported by an advisor, or at least encouraged by an advisor, and that advisor would need to be up to speed as well and be using the technology. So that's really important, because that relates to the knowledge and self-confidence and self-reliance. So this group is definitely, so the under 0 is really referring here to them being open, sort of anti-intuitive, sort of being more open to external advice. So whether they have those private advisors, isn't there very clear in the segmentation, but absolutely, if they're using those people, they're going to be really important for getting the value here. But is there anyone wants to say sort of what would be the selling point, I suppose, for the drone technology for this group? What sort of value would this group get?
I would go for the...
Yeah, so go.
Oh, sorry. We've actually done dairy ag tech in dairy at the moment.
Yep.
And we'd surveyed farmers, and in Victoria, the farmers, especially in northern groups, they have they get together in this kind of little support group, and they'll adopt from there. So it's identified for us a channel where they can go, where they've got advisors in there, like agronomists and people that they trust, and then they've got your early adopters in there that then pass on the information to those people that have that doubt inside. They love their farming, and they probably are a little bit risk averse. These ones are risk averse, and so they rely on someone else providing that information and having experienced it and showing the benefits to it already through that network those little networks that they've got. That's what we're finding so far.
Yeah, thanks. Yep, and someone else was going to chime in there.
I was just going to say the farm themselves would benefit the most, because if they can improve their pasture health and their stock health, it all helps the bottom line and helps them and the environment. So they're the benefits.
There's an example of that in the IoT stuff being done in Queensland for runoff, for fertilizer runoff. So farmers that have got, and that would be sort of the same sort of thing, where if you've got something happening instantly, which a drone tells you, you can go and address it instantly, which is what you're saying, Sam, which reduces waste and bottom line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I look at this, though, what are their internal motivators? And the two ones that stick out are the farming tradition and the intergenerational orientation. So if you're trying to sell them new technology, you have to appeal to those two things. Regardless of what channel you use to get there, you're looking at couching the business case for adopting this technology in that it helps your farm go into the next generation. And somehow you've got to lower the impact on the traditional way that they farm to be able to break through the mindset.
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head. So in terms of the value that they might achieve, many of you went to that, oh, well, it's going to help them monitor the pastures and the animals, and that absolutely. But the motivation or the value they'd get is the enjoyment of being involved, perhaps in this, but that it could be excite the next generation. That's what it's going to do. That's the value that it's going to bring. But it could be excite the next generation without changing what you're doing or something like that, you know, because it's they still want to keep sort of what they're doing. So the value is actually about, as you said, the next gen that's going to resonate here, and that it's not going to change their traditions too much. Absolutely, you were right. Everyone else talking about who they'd be talking to. So the dairy business networks, the groups, they would have so much exposure to this. They're probably already using it. But yeah, it's they're the sort of the things you're thinking that you need to think about. But you know, this one was too easy, I think, for you, because you're already working, I think, with this group or have exposure with this group, and that's really important to do that. But are you trying to go deeper or different? And so the hard one is this group. And so it's still a big proportion of the population in this case, and it's the established and stable group. So you can see that there's a bit lower in business orientation. They're not really motivated necessarily by the next gen. They're quite low. They're quite risk is really important to them. So what's the value then for this group that you could consider, do you think? Or who should they talk to, or what message?
One thought I've got, Ruth, is that in this group, maybe seeing is believing. So using visual cues, if you take a photo from a drone and they see their farm from the visual, and they might get a different perspective, that might sort of pique their interest.
Yeah, so they're still interested in farming. They're still, you know, they're happy and content with what they're doing. But exactly what you said, Nikki, what you can provide is a way that they you know, have fresh eyes on their farm.
They're also competitive with their local neighbours and stuff too. They want to see they're doing better or against them if they're doing, because they don't like to necessarily give everything away, from what I understand, but they do like to see that they're doing better if they can.
Yeah, it's probably a bit, the segmentation's a little bit silent on that social comparison aspect, but looking at the knowledge and self-confidence and reliance as being about average, meaning that they will look outside of their sort of peer group a little, but they're not active in comparing or in getting external input. But definitely giving fresh eyes to the farm would be the real value of a tech like this, and a way that mean that they're not getting their, you know, what they're trying to achieve, or it's not going to rock the boat too much, if that makes sense. Yeah. Is there other value? Look, value is very hard to see for this group.
So they're risk averse and under financial pressure.
Feeling that they are, yeah.
Feeling as though they are. So if you're going to talk about a solution for them, you have to highlight the risks of not doing it more than the risks of doing it. So the business case is very much about, oh, the world might end if you don't have this product, and it'll be easy to implement, and the business case will really have to stand up from a financial point of view.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely emphasizing the low risk or low cost, or highlighting the satisfaction it's going to bring.
Or what they might
yeah.
lose if they
Yep.
don't.
Yep. So that in fact you might run into problems if you're not onto this with, say, biosecurity or something. Yeah.
What about return on investment? So if this will cost you $1 a hectare per month, but you'll get over the year, you'll get 110,000 improving in your operational profit. Like, would that be something that they could respond to because of the financial pressure perception?
Yeah, this is what's fascinating about a segment like this, because they're low in business orientation. So they're, probably in quite a good position, but don't necessarily want to take on more investment because they don't want to expose themselves to risk. Like it's that really nuanced appreciation. So a benefit cost might not necessarily resonate unless it was so good, like you just explained there. Like it's about having that and hearing that from a peer or someone another farmer they really trust, that said, oh, you've just got to do this because look what it's done for me. So yeah, it's quite a nuanced view around this group.
So how would you address financial pressure perceptions? Because it's a perception. So
yeah. So I think it is there about being very clear what it would mean, or what the type of risks were, and as what was said, the risk of not doing something as well.
Yeah, risk of nothing.
Yeah, and that it won't expose them, because that's perception is also that sense of exposure. This is going to put me too much out on the limb. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else here?
Oh, I was going to say that it's almost they have to do it because a lot of the drones that are over sort of like $2,400 and above, they all have the homing, can come back, and if they have the laser perimeter around the main herd for stress from foxes and wild dogs, where the drone can go straight out for the farmer and have a look where they are, and then they can sort it out. But also, if they had the infrared, to me, that would be the really big one, to watch the temperature of the cattle, because they can't really see who's sick and who's not. With the temperature, they would see the cows straight away and how they're wandering around the paddock. I think that would save, pay the cost in a year for sure.
Yeah, and I think you've tapped into something there, Rel, that that idea of they are self-sufficient, they're established, they're stable, they're happy, content. But what you're saying is you'll be able to see your farm with these fresh eyes. You'll be able to have that more detailed understanding to be able to act more quickly and save money, or save animal health and things like that. So what you're going to talk about, perhaps when you walked up onto that farm, was, that this infrared technology is really great, but what you can now do is talk more about what it's going to allow them to be able to do and achieve, that taps more into what they are, not just the features of the technology, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah. So look, we've only just scratched the surface there, but I think you can hear from how we've talked about this, that it is really forcing us to think about how we can reach people that we might have put into the too hard basket, or what's going to be important to them. And as I said, I'm very happy to share all the detail of this, but what I wanted to do, just to wrap up, was to have you think about, is there a way that you could apply this way of thinking to your specific interest? So the products and services you're actively working on, or something that you're doing. So I was just wondering whether we could, now don't all disappear, it'll only be a few minutes, if we could just go into breakout rooms just for 2 minutes and then come back quickly to wrap up. But it's really just to get you talking to your peers here in the room about how you could apply this way of thinking, or if there's anything that's resonated with you about some different messages that you might think about for your own areas. So Taylor has you in breakout rooms. If you don't want to talk about this, you can just catch up with whoever's in the room just for 2 minutes. But then come back and we'll just wrap it up. And I'm available to stay on if people would like to talk to me longer, but we'll finish by 1:30 so everyone can get going onto their afternoon. But I do just have some final comments when we get back from the breakout rooms. So Taylor, is it okay to send everybody off and then bring them back in a couple of minutes? Well, I'll just, yeah, because we're at time, if you have any comments, could you put them in the chat about what you discussed? Is there anything that you might do differently now, or that there's different ways you might approach different groups based on what you've heard today? That would be great, and that provides some good feedback. So do feel free to put it in the chat. So just concluding, as I want to say, you don't have to complete a segmentation analysis for your products and services to apply segmentation. Today was about what I call segmentation thinking. And it's to consider how you modify your message or your collaborators and services to meet the needs that align with the different values that are there amongst farmers and clients. As I said, we do offer a micro-credential if you're really keen on this area. And also we do other agricultural extension training. I have my email there and website. There's also a paper if you want the background to the data that we used today. And that's just the reference that was there for understanding and working with the diversity of farmers. As I said, I'm very happy to stay on if people would like to chat, but I just thank you so much for joining in. And Nikki, thanks very much for the invitation. And I look forward to hearing all about and more about your products, services and technologies and what you're doing as part of Ag Seeds. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.